What is up, everybody? It's Brian Wilkerson, and we are back, and we are working on Thomas Lassard's 180SX here. And one of the things that I showed you at the end of the last video was this Billet SR20. So I broke the news that we're going to be running a 2.35 liter billet block Mazworx SR engine, dry sump, Garrett G35 1050 turbo, really sweet like billet runner sheet metal intake manifold, VVL cylinder head. In this video, we are going to start mocking the engine up in the car. We have a bell housing, an adapter plate for the factory SR20 auto bell housing, and that adapter plate is to fit this GSR transmission from G-Force we provided. Instead of using that to start, we have this mock-up transmission here. It's gutted and it's super lightweight and easy to work with. So what I'm going to do is get this stuff along with the clutch preemptively bolted up to the engine, and we're going to start dropping it into the car. Here's a little bit better look at this SR20 hanging from the hoist. We can get underneath of it now and see this really pretty billet dry sump pan that Mazworx makes. And then they do these like mitered stainless hard lines. We are using one of these ACT race clutches. These are not like the typical yellow steel covered clutches they sell. They make these in twin plate and triple plate, and we use the triple plate version on 2Js very often. So the crank is drilled for these 1/2 inch L19 flywheel bolts, but the flywheel that we got direct from ACT is not. So we got to enlarge all 8 of these holes. Got the mock-up transmission on the not mock-up engine. And now Chris is going to design some plates to bolt to the factory engine mount bracket location, and then we're going to drop this thing in the car. Got the engine sitting in the car. Chris is working on shimming it and getting it level right now. We have some obstacles. There will be some compromise. We have the downpipe that came with this kit did not work at all. It hit the firewall, and then we're using what is already a super short clutch master cylinder, the little Tilton, where the fitting comes out of the top, not even the front, and then a very thin adapter plate, and that is very close to our intake manifold and fuel rail scenario here. So that's kind of our biggest battle and what's keeping us from getting the engine much further back, but I'm not upset at all with where this is, to be honest with you. So we were originally going to mount the engine vertically, so not at a factory lean. After talking with Thomas, he wanted to see the lean, and the only real issue that ends up giving us is that it blocks our clutch master cylinder. If the engine was standing up, this clutch master cylinder would almost be on top of this, like it would, you'd be able to get this out. So for now, you know, that's an obstacle to deal with, but luckily that's a Tilton part. Not going to worry about changing that too often. Here we are. This is our engine in its position. Chris is working on a transmission mount right now. It is right here. Looks like it's finished. We are closing in on putting some paint on this engine bay. We're just going to put a primer on it because Thomas is going to get the entire thing. He's going to take the whole car apart when he gets it back from us and get the whole thing like professionally painted. We do still have some other fab work to do to the front of this, but we're just going to kind of touch those items up as needed as we go. Coat a primer on the engine bay. Now we can get back to work. Gonna get the engine put back in and start plumbing and fabricating.
Shave off an 1/8 inch off that rounded corner thing.
Oh, I gotcha. Chris is getting the sway bar set up in the front, and meanwhile I am going to make this alternator bracket work. It's a pretty cool billet alternator bracket from Mazworx that puts the alternator over where the AC compressor normally is. Sadly, it does not fit this car because it has the front rack. Normally this obviously isn't there. This is like the WiseFab brace, but the rack itself is usually on the back of the cross member. But the WiseFab V3 uses a BMW rack in the front. So we need to cut some off of this and then sort out how we're gonna kind of remount the alternator, because it normally was like a double shear thing here, and we're either gonna make it double shear again, or we're just gonna make it kind of single shear off the front, which I also think will work fine. So yeah, what I'm doing here is just milling some material off this bracket to clear the rack, make the part where the double shear part of the alternator goes, we're just gonna make that narrower. So I'm just kind of whittling away at this thing a little bit at a time, just to narrow that thing up there. Fully welded on brackets for the sway bar mount. These are nice and sturdy. Here is the engine mount installed. As you can see, we used like a double shear or like a clevis style mounting on the frame rail of the chassis. And in order to make the engine easier to get out, we made the front part removable. So you remove those two bolts, and then you can slide the whole engine forward, as opposed to having to lift it straight up out of that, which would potentially get in the way, especially if you wanted to remove it with the bell housing and all on it. Here is the other side. A little bit of gusset on there, just a little more weld surface area, and spread the load across the width of that bracket. Successfully trim this up, and so we're now just going to have that one mount ear off of here. With how thick this thing is, I'm not really worried about anything flexing or anything like that. So we're going to bolt this on, get the alternator on, so we know where it goes and we can start plumbing and such around it. All right, I was really hoping that this alternator was going to fit in here, and I did get the alternator to fit. I had to cut up this like WiseFab brace a bunch. I got the alternator to physically bolt in. However, it doesn't have any room to swing or tension, and it just hits the rack, and we're not going to move the rack. So instead of pivoting this way, Chris came up with a really good idea we're going to weld a slug on here, and it's going to pivot this way. So that's the current plan. I'm going to turn up a slug on the lathe, we're going to drill it and tap it, and then we're going to, well, I might not drill it and tap it, I might through bolt it, we'll see. But we're going to weld that on at this plane, and then we'll make a new turnbuckle that connects the bottom of the alternator. So I got this thing bolted to a fixture plate, or this part's just clamped down. My slug that I turned down in the lathe is bolted to it so that they stay on the same plane, and I welded it and I'm just letting it cool down. This is what we came up with for this scavenge hose. Super tight radius here, and then Mazworx already had this really tight radius off the bottom of the pump here, and so I got a weld on like a nipple, like a crimp from BMRS, welded it on, crimped the hose directly to it, and we even have a little scavenge filter. And we are in there, pretty tight tolerance everywhere, but we were able to come up with a solution, and that looks like a big gap there, but it's not. We already had to grind some of the steering rack off, so there it is. So I got this alternator bracket bolted back on the engine, and it turns out that it doesn't line up anyway. So I lined up this with this surface, and these ears are the same on both. I mean, they might be off like a thou or two, but nothing major. And our pulleys still don't line up, sadly, so I'm gonna have to put a spacer behind here, or I'm gonna see about getting a different pulley or spacing the pulley maybe. You can see from underneath here that I also milled a pocket here, so this is no longer flush, and I did that so that I can then fit a adjuster in here without it being super angled or crooked, and that would probably make it bind up. So now it has a straight shot. Chris actually made this entire intercooler from scratch. It used a Garrett core, and then he made these end tanks, and they fit real good in there, just barely enough air gap. You can also see that we mounted the oil core. It's partially mounted to the intercooler, and then it's also mounted to the chassis down here. So while we normally do couplers on the pro level stuff, or any level drift car really, Thomas really wanted to use a more secure seal for his intercooler pipes. So we chose to use the new 411 Works quick clamps. These are a quick release clamp, sealed with 2 O-rings underneath, one on each end, and they still do allow a little bit of movement as well. We also got the exhaust system finished. The kit came with a 3-inch downpipe, and we're using a 3.5-inch now. It's a pretty tight fit, and I'm going to suggest some heat wrap on that thing or some sort of heat shielding for sure. Nice little wastegate screamer pipe here, and continuing the 3.5-inch tubing. We also got this from 411 Works as well. Pro car style exhaust here, where it dumps right at the rear axle center line per the rule book. This car is not really going to have much of an issue with needing to be lightweight. I think that this car is going to be underweight, if anything, and for that reason we went with a stainless exhaust. It's a really good place to have the extra weight if you do need it, low and centered. So stainless it is on this one. In the next video, we're going to touch on the plumbing and quite a few other little details as we pretty much wrap this thing up, which we'll probably be doing in the next week or so. So the next video will be the last on this car, probably. It should have some pretty cool, fun details in it. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. See you on the next video.